New video related to a shocking crime. This dad is accused of killing his daughter. Here he is in shackles, reportedly headed to his first court appearance in New York. Video per WNYT TV. He seemed like a loving father. He called his daughter the light of his life. But now he's in jail. He is charged with her murder. This is a story that is so hard to believe. Police say this dad lied about his daughter being abducted. It triggered an Amber Alert in New York over the weekend.
Initial reports from Mr. Frattolin of a suspicious white van in the area of the alleged disappearance was proven to be untrue.
We have the latest on a story that took a heartbreaking turn in what may have led this father to allegedly kill his 9-year-old daughter on vacation. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. It is hard to make sense of the story that we're talking about today. A father who took his daughter to New York for a 10-day vacation, and then police say on the last day of their vacation, he killed her. We learned a lot of shocking information today in this story. And before I get to the update, let me introduce you to the girl who is at the center of this story, the young girl who lost her life, 9-year-old Melina Frattolin. She lived in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and she came to the US with her dad on July 11th, according to police. Here's his picture. His name is Luciano Frattolin. Police say the two of them came into the US for a dad and daughter trip. They went to New York City, they visited Connecticut, they went to some spots in upstate New York, according to police. Luciano is reportedly the founder of an organic coffee company. Here's his bio on the company's website, and in that biography, it reads that his daughter Melina is the light of his life, and quote, she is the inspiration for, well, everything. Luciano grew up in Ethiopia. The bio goes on to say, quote, his pursuits for building a more equitable and just world are deeply guided by his determination that she, his daughter, will not have to endure the same social injustices that he encountered throughout his childhood. His Instagram shows him taking Melina sledding in the snow. His social media makes this story so much more difficult to bear because of how much time it seemed that he spent with his daughter. And at least there was the appearance that he loved his daughter. This is a montage of all the places they went together. This just hits you in the heart, if you're a parent or not, when you watch all of this. Here is Melina on Valentine's Day with a horse in a picture posted by her dad, and here he is giving her a big hug and a kiss on the head in what appears to be her birthday. After seeing all of that, it's really difficult to talk about the next part, but this is what police are telling us happened. New York State Police say on Saturday, Luciano Frattolin called 911 around 10 p.m. from alongside a highway heading north near Lake George, New York. Here is what police say he said per WRGB TV.
So the suspect's initial account is that he had pulled over in the area of exit 22 in Lake George, pulled over into a parking lot to urinate. His initial report is he steps away to a wooded area, returns to the vehicle, and at that point, his child is gone from the vehicle. He reports a suspicious white van fleeing the scene southbound. During a subsequent interview, he then reports 2 unknown males forced her into a white van. That lead was thoroughly investigated and disproven.
Police say Luciano and Melina were heading back to Canada after they spent 10 days in the U.S. on vacation, and they crossed into the U.S. legally on July 11th. Police put out an Amber Alert on Saturday night, but police say over time, they found inconsistencies in what Luciano was reportedly telling them. They say around 6:30 p.m. on Saturday night, Melina called her mom to tell her that she and her dad were heading home after their trip. Police say it didn't seem that she was in duress or in danger, at least on the phone. The next day before noon, police say they searched a wooded area near Ticonderoga, New York that they believed Luciano had visited, and that is where they made a terrible discovery.
On Sunday, July 20th, a search detail comprised of officers from multiple agencies conducted an organized search in the town of Ticonderoga, New York. In an area Mr. Frattolin was suspected of having visited. During that search detail, at approximately 10:50, members of the New York State Police Forest Rangers located Melina deceased in the shallow portion of a pond.
Police say on Sunday, Luciano was to return Melina to her mom. That's his estranged wife, who has full custody of the 9-year-old girl. Police believe that Luciano killed his daughter after she called her mom on the phone to tell her that they were heading home before he made that 911 call a few hours later and, according to police, lied about what actually happened. Again, there was no abduction. Police say they don't have an official motive for the alleged crime. Melina's cause of death has yet to be determined, but an autopsy is pending and it was scheduled to be done today. This is new video just in of Luciano leaving jail in Ticonderoga, New York, headed to his first court appearance.
Mr. Frattolin, do you have anything to say? Do you have anything to say about these charges?
Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, I want to stop and talk about our partners at Morgan & Morgan. There is a reason they are America's largest injury law firm, and it has to do with the fact that they have more than 1,000 attorneys and they win a lot. They've recovered over $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. So even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 easy clicks on your phone. So if you've been hurt and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. This is his mugshot from when he was booked into the Essex County Jail this morning around 2 o'clock. And as you saw there, he didn't answer questions from reporters and just looked forward as police put him in a cruiser to take him to court. That video per WNYT-TV. According to the Albany Times-Union, which is the newspaper in upstate New York, Luciano Frattolin pleaded not guilty in that first court appearance in Ticonderoga Court. He's facing a charge, according to police, of second-degree murder as well as a count of hiding a corpse. And it's sick to think that those charges are related to the allegations that he allegedly killed his own daughter, the girl who he publicly spoke of so lovingly. Now, he is a Canadian citizen, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment with our expert. But New York State Police said at their news conference this morning that even though he's Canadian, even though the alleged victim, his daughter, in this case is Canadian, because he is accused of committing a crime in the United States, this is the country where he will be prosecuted. Now, although his custody situation may be a hint at a motive, again, there are so many questions, and one of them at this point is exactly what the motive was to allegedly do this. And another big question is, how could someone be so violent with seemingly no history of being violent, at least that we know of? New York State Police said this morning that Frattolin has no criminal history, including no allegations of domestic violence. Joining us now is retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. This story is so incredibly sad, to say the least. The call comes in Saturday night around 10 p.m. from this dad, and he gives this story of his daughter being abducted on the side of the road by 2 men driving a white van. They were going north. The van allegedly head south. That doesn't end up being true, according to police. If you were one of the investigators, you get this call, what red flags might stand out to you early just in responding to this?
Well, the first thing is if they're responding to it's his demeanor. If he's demonstrating a level of calmness or a level of just suspicious behavior, these law enforcement officers, because they're dealing with people all the time, they're going to understand whether his behavior is suspicious or if he's really a distressed father.
And when you have, and I know that every single call and every, sort of allegation that comes in, you have to investigate it, you have to take it seriously. But the story of a white van coming, yanking a girl out of the side of the road and then just driving off, it just doesn't, it seems like a very sensational story. In your experience responding to these types of cases, when you hear a story that's that sensational, does that set off a red flag about whether it may not be true?
Absolutely. You're starting. It seems like everybody wants to blame somebody else, and there's always these mysterious vans and these mysterious people, and they're basically kind of embellishing some sort of story. And that would likely was probably the first thing out of his mouth because he was developing his alibi, so to speak, to blame it on somebody else. So as soon as the cops heard that, they're like, okay, we have a problem here. And I'm sure they started digging in to find out exactly what was going on.
And when you're interviewing someone who, they make this incredible claim, you're trying to figure out where his daughter is, and you're trying to piece together whether or not he's telling the truth. What are some of the strategies you use in interviewing someone to try to piece together whether or not they're telling the truth?
Well, it all comes down to the details. The details matter in prior inconsistent statements. So, generally speaking, when you have an interview like this, you're going to let him go ahead and lay out his narrative. And then you're going to go back and start jumping into the details and really narrowing down or filtering down into some of the things he said. So, if he has a color of a car, then you're going to ask him, okay, again, what the color of the car was, and then why he knows it was white, black, purple, or green. And then if he changes in the middle of that interview to a different color, every time there's an inconsistent statement, then you're going to narrow in and zero in on that behavior. And then eventually you'll have caught him in so many lies, so to speak. He's either going to kind of give up the information or the truth, or he's going to lawyer up.
How do you go about making sure not just, how much do you actually investigate the claim, try and figure out where the girl is? Because it does seem it was pretty quick that detectives were able to understand that there were some inconsistencies in this man's story, they say. What's the next step when it comes to trying to figure out where this girl is? Because they're in a part of upstate New York. It's a very wooded area, and you're looking for one young girl and sadly they find her body, but you're looking for one young girl in the middle of a very rural part of the state.
Well, it sounds to me that based upon how quickly they were able to identify that a crime had occurred, that likely that people that were first, or the law enforcement officers, the detectives, the first ones to interact with him, did a phenomenal job on the interview, and they were able to find those inconsistencies, and then they were able to either corroborate or defeat his alibi, so to speak, very quickly. And based upon some of the things he said, if these law enforcement officers are very familiar with the area, he probably had made some statements that just didn't make any sense. They didn't match up. And then when they leaned in on him a little bit and asked him some very pointed questions, he likely gave it up, because it doesn't sound like he lawyered up in the very little media details that we have. But it appears that that first interview was what really broke this case wide open.
So he's from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and they come into the United States for, it just seemed like a dad-daughter 10-day vacation, New York City, Connecticut. But he's now in custody in Essex County, New York. How does this play out where he came into the United States? He's not a U.S. citizen. I know the state police said he's going to be tried in New York, but how does that typically play out in a case like this?
Well, the Canadian authorities are going to be notified. He has a right to notify the Canadian embassy, and they have a right to look into to make sure he's being treated appropriately and with respect. But he did commit a crime in the United States. Therefore, the United States or the local jurisdiction has the authority to prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. And then at that point, he'll be deported if he's found guilty of this. So it does play in that he is a Canadian citizen. There is a few diplomatic steps, but in terms of the actual crime, they're going to follow their own processes and prosecute him based upon the evidence that they find.
His estranged wife, and the real sad part of this is that this was the last day, according to police, of this vacation that he was on with his daughter, and he was bringing his daughter back, and he was supposed to bring her back to Canada, and her mom has full custody. But as far as just a little bit more of the jurisdictional part of this, what type of cooperation is there in these types of cases? Because often you think in the movies, oh, the person crosses a country line, and then suddenly it's two completely different worlds. from, I think of New York State Police right along the border with Quebec, Vermont, and all of that. What type of communication typically and relationship do the Canadian authorities and the American authorities have in cases like this?
Well, from a federal perspective, they're excellent. The Canadian authorities and the American authorities work very, very closely together. And then I'm sure the New York State Police, and they're a fantastic organization. They have great relationships with the Canadian authorities, and many times they're very close friends with the Canadian authorities because the Canadians will come over to fish and hunt and hang out, and vice versa. I mean, cops generally, that's kind of have a universal language, regardless of the politics that is going on in the state, in the capital, so to speak. But I'm absolutely certain that the New York State Police are getting all the cooperation that they need from the Canadian authorities, and vice versa.
Luciano Frattolin is his name. He allegedly kills his daughter, leaves her in a shallow body of water, according to police, but he doesn't run. He calls and creates this story that triggers an Amber Alert. What does that tell you about how this crime potentially went down, knowing that he didn't try to flee, he tried to get out of it potentially by just making up a story?
Well, it kind of tells me, obviously we're speculating on his state of mind and what was going on, but it tells me that there wasn't a lot of higher level thinking or planning that went into this. It appears that he just had some sort of reaction to some situation that occurred, and then he thought that he could, come up with some elaborate ruse or plan, which obviously the authorities broke down his story very quickly. So it just doesn't appear that there was any long-term planning to this. I think there was a reaction to something that happened.
He, and sadly, I feel like we've seen cases like this in the past where you have someone involved in some sort of, I don't know if it's a child custody dispute, but he was going to return his daughter to his estranged wife. His estranged wife had full custody. They were on the final day of a vacation. There's no official motive at this point, but New York State Police pointed that out. But he also didn't have a history of domestic violence. He didn't have any sort of criminal background, according to police. What stands out to you when we're trying to piece together what exactly happened here? That it does, I'm not going to say it came out of the blue, but in terms of even the girl had called her mom, according to police, and it didn't seem that she was in duress around 6:30 that night before this 911 call is made hours later.
It appears that there was a reaction, like I said. So what they're going to be focusing on his communications on his phone with his ex-wife. There might have been something leading up to this through the communications that really basically set him off and made him go to that final level. So it appears that there was no history of this. That doesn't necessarily mean that this has never happened, but it also really shows that that there was some issue there, and that the communications between him and his wife are going to be very important.
Yeah, what type of access will authorities, like once someone goes into jail on a crime like this, now he's behind bars. I assume eventually he'll end up getting a lawyer. But if you were an investigator on this, how often can you talk to him moving forward?
Well, it kind of comes down to, if he gets a lawyer, then all communications have to go through the lawyer. So that's why that first interview is so important, but because before a lawyer, frankly, gets involved, although it is everybody's right to have a lawyer at any time they do interact with the authorities. But it really comes down to how much information they got from him before, including if he gave them access to his phone, and most importantly, the password or the passcode to get in that phone.
And then what can, just in your experience in working on a federal level, when it comes to these domestic cases, and I know a lot of times that's a state or city type of case, but when you have someone who, he was going to return his daughter for custody, and even though there wasn't a history of this, something was going on emotionally. What can be done to prevent these types of situations in the future? And I know that there's still a lot that we don't know, and we did learn a lot today from New York State Police, but there's a lot that we still don't know about this case.
Well, to prevent this, you're talking about having some sort of department of pre-crime and being able to get in the minds of people. Generally speaking, their history is what's going to predict their future behavior. And in this case, he didn't have any history of domestic violence that we're aware of. So in this case, there really isn't anything that comes to mind that could have prevented this. unless the wife had known there was some sort of level of violence or some issue, and she could have reported it, or the mother, I'm sorry, but it doesn't appear that was the case here.
Yeah, it's just an incredibly sad story. We'll see how the legal part of it plays out, but a lot of questions still unanswered. Colin Schmidt, retired FBI agent. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with me.
All right, thank you. Take it easy.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.